I have decided that I'm going to try and start a YouTube channel in January, in the new year. And the channel is going to be sort of photography tutorials. However, one of the groups that I'm a member of on Facebook, a question came up about motor racing photography. Of course, that's far too big a question to answer in a Facebook comment. So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a YouTube video to try and answer the question. And I thought maybe we could just use this as a little bit of a sample and see if anybody likes it. See if anybody thinks I'm any good at doing this tutorial, this type of video. So here we go. Let's talk about motor racing photography. Obviously, as you can see, it's bloody cold, it's the middle of winter and there's no motor racing going on anywhere. So I've just put my Suzuki jacket on for effect, sort of look the part. And let's start. So first of all, what we need to really look at is camera settings. And the most important setting that you're going to need on your camera is shutter priority. That's the S on your dial. Now, the sports mode that's built into most cameras is of no use to you whatsoever when you're doing motor racing photography, because it always tries to go for the highest possible shutter speed. And it's all very well, but the problem is, if you take a picture of a race car coming towards you at 1,000th of a second, it just looks like somebody's parked the car on the track. So you really need a sense of movement. You need a slower shutter speed to create the motion blur. The exact shutter speed we'll get to later on. The next thing you need to make sure is that your camera is set to continuous autofocus. Obviously, whatever you're photographing is going to be moving, so continuous autofocus is going to be the only way to go. Now, some cameras have a lot of fancy different modes and different types of continuous autofocus, but really experiment with them, choose the one that suits you best, but generally just the standard center autofocus continuous is going to work pretty well. Just a little word on autofocus. You may have been told or led to believe by some people that all professionals do everything manually. Well, as somebody who spent many years as a professional photographer, I can assure you that's not the case. Use any automation that's available to you, as long as you understand what the automation is doing and when you need to override it. Now, if you do get to a situation where the camera simply will not do the job, you can flick over to manual focus, and you can use a technique called pre-focus. Now, what pre-focus does is you focus on a point, you wait until the bike or the car gets to that point, and at that point it's sharp, that's the point you take the picture. And it sounds very, very difficult, because you kind of think that you've got to wait and concentrate in your viewfinder to see is it exactly at the right point where it's sharp. You're on a fool's errand there. What you need to do is look for a point on the track, a tyre mark or a change in the colour of the tarmac or something distinguishing. Focus on that point, wait until the car or bike gets there, and then take your picture. And then of course you need your motor drive set to continuous. I always set it to continuous low, because generally you're shooting one frame at a time, and with the drive on continuous low you can do that quite easily. However, When something does happen and there's a bit of action and you want 3 or 4 frames together, you just hold your finger down and you can get that whole sequence. A lot of people will try and take 4 or 5 frames on every single shot, and that's up to you, but it leaves you a lot of work to do in your editing. And I'm film trained. Every frame used to cost money, so it really isn't my habit to just leave my finger on the shutter and take hundreds of pictures at a time. Now the next thing is, you're going to need to know your subject. Obviously, if you're enthusiastic about motor racing, you probably already do know your subject, but if it's just a passing interest, you really need to find out a little bit more and do a little bit of research. Because, for example, there are only certain corners on a track that have overtaking maneuvers on a regular basis, and if you want to take pictures of overtaking and you're at the wrong corner, you're going to be there all day and get nothing. So you really need to learn your subject. More important though, you're better off starting off at smaller regional events where there's far less restriction, where you can move around more easily and where you can get closer to the action. If you go to a MotoGP or a Formula 1 race, you're going to be in such a crowded environment, and there's going to be high fences, you're going to be a long way from the track, and every time you stand up to take a picture, the person behind you gets annoyed. So if you're at a real high profile event like that, best option is to leave your camera at home and just enjoy the race. You need to just find the smaller events, the more regional ones, and start to learn a little bit from there. Obviously in the middle of that you get the national race meetings, and yeah, it's quite crowded, but you can usually find a spot and make the best of it. But it's better that you've already learned how to do this and how to get good shots at regional events. You find that there's just far less restriction, people are more friendly. Just walk up to people like the marshals, introduce yourself, tell them what you're doing, they'll be fine. Really, they only get annoyed when you do silly things and when they don't know what you're doing. If you go up to the marshals, tell them what you want to do, they'll tell you what they don't want you to do, and generally you'll be fine. And of course, the next thing is, what lens do you want? Now, generally you're going to need some sort of telephoto lens, because motor racing is a high-speed sport and you're not going to get really that close to the action even at a regional event. So some sort of telephoto lens is going to be in the order of the day. But don't get fooled into this idea that you need the biggest and the fastest lens. When you're shooting action at motor racing, quite often, as I said before, you want some motion blur, and you're going to be using fairly slow shutter speeds, so your aperture will be quite small. So you could get yourself a long telephoto wide aperture lens. It's going to cost you 3 times as much, and it's going to be twice as heavy, and it's going to be completely useless to you because you're never going to use the wide aperture. And obviously you want one of those lenses because you think that people are not going to take you seriously if you haven't got a big, fast, white lens. Well, forget about it. It's far better to be judged by the work that you produce than the equipment that you own. So most of the time I've shot motor racing, I've used a combination of a 200mm and 300mm lens. Sometimes even I find the 200mm is too long, particularly when you're doing a side-on pan shot. So a zoom lens in the range of sort of 70 to 300 is going to be ideal. and if it has a maximum aperture of 5.6, you're good to go with that. So let's just talk briefly about shutter speed. Now, if something's coming towards you, the shutter speed is going to be faster than if it's going past you. Now, what you need to decide is how fast is that going to be coming towards you. There is no hard and fast rule, although just as a guideline, I tend to find that when you have bikes coming towards you, about a 400th of a second seems to work quite well. That way you'll freeze the action, but you'll still get a little bit of movement in the wheels, and you'll just get a little bit of feeling of more action. Obviously bikes are easier than cars because the riders sort of hang off and run their knee on the ground and so on, so you do get more of a sense of action than you do with a car. But even with cars, if you could just get that little bit of movement, so 250 to 500 range of shutter speed seems to work quite well. But again, it will depend on the circuit you're at, and it will depend on the class of vehicles that you're photographing. For a pan shot, you need to look at about 125th of a second. But again, it's just a guideline. If you're at a very slow corner, you may want to go down to a 60th of a second. If you're on a very fast straight, you may be able to get away with 250th of a second. But use 125th as a starting point, and that'll give you a good little guideline. What you're looking for is you're looking for some motion blur. You're looking for something that gives a sense of speed. One thing to bear in mind is when you're photographing cars or bikes coming towards you, you tend to take the picture too early because it seems to be happening all very quickly, and you kind of get into a little bit of a panic, and you take the picture, and when you go back to your computer you find that you've got a sort of tiny little dot in the center of your frame. So my little technique for that is wait until the point where you think it's too late. So as the bike comes towards you, wait, oh no, it's too late, that's the time to take the picture. Now, the best way to get motion blur is the pan shot. And it really can look quite dramatic, and it really does give you a sense of speed if you get it right. Just remember, you're not going to get one right every time. Even professional photographers have a hit rate of about 1 in 10. So don't feel despondent if this panning technique doesn't work out for you straight away. It does take practice, but it is worth pursuing. Just remember, it's better to go home with 10 really good shots than 100 mediocre ones. So let's just talk about panning. Now, if you've ever played golf, you are in a good shape because there is a lot in common with a golf swing. So the first thing that you need to think about is, where is the action going to happen? Generally, you want to take the picture when the car or bike is directly in front of you, there. So set yourself up so that is your most comfortable position. And like golf, have your feet slightly apart, a little bit of bend in your knees. Find the subject, lock the focus on, take the picture, follow through. Panning is easier when you're further away with your telephoto lens, because of the speed differential. If you've got something that's coming past you at 150 miles an hour and it's 3 feet away from you, your pan is going to be very quick. If something is further away, still doing 150 miles an hour, it's far easier to follow it and pan it through. Sometimes you have no choice, but again, as I said, a little bit of practice, a little bit of perseverance, and you'll start to get really good shots. Also, when you're doing your pan, make sure you've got a nice even footing. If you're trying to take a pan shot and you've got one foot on a rock and the other one on some slippery sand, you're just not going to get any good pictures. And of course, motor racing doesn't just happen on the track. There's all sorts of interesting pictures that can be taken inside the pits and behind the scenes. So don't think that you've just got to get action pictures out on the circuit. Have a walk around and there's a lot of atmospheric shots that are worth capturing. And I hope that helps.